You're always nitpicking me with all the ways that I'm failing you instead of focusing on the positive. And I never feel like anything that I do is right in your eyes.
I just want to feel like we're getting the best possible time together that we can.
I know, and I want to feel like you appreciate the time that I do spend with you and what I do for you.
End scene.
Drama.
It was too real.
Right? No, exactly. Oh, man. If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
If you enjoy sucking at communication,
And you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
but if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Dedeker.
and this is the Multiamory Podcast.
Songs I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory Podcast, we're opening our Communication Hacks Booster Pack. The three of us are going to walk through and walk each other through a communication tip that we recently discovered and thought was super awesome. Also, Dedeker is sick,
I'm sick.
and it sucks.
I'm sorry.
And we're about to go on tour, so get better now.
I'm doing my best. I'm glad that I'm sick now rather than while we're on tour.
Yeah, seriously.
Ditto.
I'm going to try my best to not be too sniffly in your ears.
Thank you.
Dear listeners. I can't make any promises, though. I'm really sorry.
I'm sure they appreciate it.
Wait, appreciate what? My sniffling or my lack of sniffling?
You
Or my
trying not
attempts?
to sniffle
My trying
your
not to.
attempts.
Oh, that's good.
It's
That's
the
good.
thought that counts.
Yes,
certainly
at the
hope
very
so.
least, it's the thought that counts.
Even if you fail.
Yeah.
So the idea for this episode, there were a few different things that have come up that are like communication hacks or communication tools that weren't quite big enough to fill an entire episode. And so we said, hey, why don't we each take one of these and share them with each other for all of y'all?
Yeah, because communication, as everybody who's polyamorous knows, is probably the number one thing that we say that you need.
Yes.
So
But you also
communication.
You also know that on this show we love hacking things.
Yeah.
And we love
Yeah.
shortcuts and we love tools and we love acronyms. We don't have any acronyms for this episode,
No.
but we do love that shit.
We do
Yes.
love acronyms a lot and alliterative names for things.
That's true.
Yeah. So who wants to start us off today?
So I'm the first one. And this comes from Josh, my partner, told me about an NPR podcast that he was listening to, which was The Hidden Brain. And on it, they talked about this amazing thing called switch tracking. And Jase came up with a bunch of different
is
names
that
for
the
it.
thing that they do with railroads?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Is that track switching? That's track switching, right?
Well, switch
I
tracking.
thought that was train spotting.
No,
Trainspotting?
that's an Ewan McGregor
I thought that was
movie.
cross-hatching.
Yes, that's an Ewan McGregor movie. Moving on. Also Danny Boyle. But no, what it is that it's a thing in communication that kind of causes a breakdown in communication. So someone may give you feedback, and then your reaction to that feedback just completely changes the subject. So the conversation starts on one track, and then because of somebody's like emotional reaction or some feedback, it changes to an entirely different track, and then people are essentially like talking past each other at that point.
I have a
I'm
question.
confused. You go ahead.
Okay. Is this something that people do intentionally? As in, you bring up some kind of criticism about me, and so I intentionally try to kind of fog the issue by bringing up something else, or is this an unintentional thing that people do?
I would say usually it's a completely unintentional
Oh, really?
thing.
Okay.
But I mean, it's a thing that I think happens a lot in communication where you end up like saying completely different things. It's as though
Right.
you're like talking to each other, but at each other, and like nobody's actually getting through anything that they're speaking about because you're both on completely different wavelengths. So I created, yes.
So I just want to clarify. So
Yes.
this is different from just changing changing topics.
Well, it
This
is-
is something else.
It is essentially changing topics, but also like changing the subject in the middle of the argument that may be happening. But you may not think that that's what's occurring. You may like think like, okay, I'm addressing an issue that I think needs to be resolved. And then your partner may be like, well, I have an issue that I think is related, and yet you two may be speaking about something completely different and then therefore talking past each other.
So it's kind of like you bring up an issue, and my
Yes.
response to that issue is to bring up a different issue that
Correct.
in my head I think is the same thing, but
Yes.
is maybe not actually the same thing. And then we're both arguing actually for
In
kind
circles, yes.
of in circles and maybe for entirely different issues, not realizing that
we're doing that.
we're doing that.
Yes.
I see.
And so, yes.
Yeah, can you give us an example of this?
Well, I created an example for you, and you two are going to say the example.
You made a script for us?
Yes, I did, and I
You
color-coded
you wrote
it.
a script?
I color-coded
You
it
became a
and everything.
screenwriter? Wow.
I'm not good at just so everybody knows.
So is this like the first
like some
multi-amory radio drama?
Radio drama.
Yes,
We
and
need to get some
so
Foley up in here.
the two of you are going to be the radio dramatists.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I mean, you both have been actors in your day, so
We both have gotten into some arguments too.
yes. So I expect
Just a
greatness.
handful.
I expect like real human drama right now.
Okay.
So
I mean,
please-
gosh, doing it cold.
You're cold reading.
now.
Cold reading.
Okay.
You
This is-
took a bunch of classes.
I've taken
on
some
this.
cold reading
yes,
classes,
there you go.
okay.
Right.
So come
Okay.
on, give it to me, baby.
I mean, my instrument isn't at 100%,
Just-
you know. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you set the scene for us? Maybe.
Okay, the scene is set. A kitchen table, two people quietly eating their dinner, a couple, and gently a person places his fork down. Yes,
I'm trying to do some Foley. for
exactly.
this.
And then he clears his throat and says the following.
Honey, I want to talk to you about something. I really feel like our time together has been limited, and when we do see each other, it hasn't been the quality time that I need when I'm with you. You're generally on the phone, texting your other partners. You seem pretty spaced out when we're together.
now I take a long drag of a cigarette.
Yeah,
That's what'll explain my husky voice this week.
there you go.
See, I don't understand why you aren't appreciative of the time that we spend together. You know, now that Anna and I broke up, I see you 3 times a week pretty regularly, and you aren't appreciative of the time that I spend with you or the things that I do for you during that time, and instead I feel like you're always focusing on the negative or what you're not getting.
I really just think the time we're spending together hasn't felt that special or fulfilling, and I think that we need to focus on that right now.
I know, and I'm saying that if I'm with you and I'm around you, then that should be appreciated. You're always nitpicking me with all the ways that I'm failing you instead of focusing on the positive, and I never feel like anything that I do is right in your eyes.
I just want to feel like we're getting the best possible time together that we can.
I know, and I want to feel like you appreciate the time that I do spend with you and what I do for you.
End scene.
Drama.
It was too
Right?
real.
Those are-
No, exactly. Oh man. So this scene illustrates Jase. He just really feels like he's not getting the best quality time. And again, when we've talked about things like what our love language is, maybe Jase's is quality
Right.
time.
So Jase's complaint is in this situation is like the time that we spend together
Has
is
not
not
felt-
quality time. Like
Exactly.
you're checked out
Yes.
during that time, and I want you to, you know, be present.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Essentially,
then
okay.
Dedeker is saying like, oh my God, you're always nitpicking me.
Right.
You're not appreciative of the time that I am giving you and all the things that I
Right.
feel like I am doing for you.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
like
in
I'm moving
essence-
my schedule around. I'm prioritizing time together.
Exactly.
But like you're nitpicking me about
So-
being on the phone. Okay.
So what I think is interesting about this is from the point of view of my character here. From my point of view, the conversation is about our quality time and how I don't think we're spending it. And so to me, it just sounds like she's avoiding the issue
Yes.
or she's getting defensive or she doesn't want to admit to it because she must know that she's wrong or
Totally.
something. Like that's how it feels from my point of view because I think the conversation is about our quality time that we're spending together and, you know, how it hasn't been as quality as I'd like.
Exactly.
But then from your point of view in that story,
Like for me, it's about like you always criticizing me or you not appreciating me.
Yeah.
I see. And so it's like the fact that like I hear your criticism and my response to it is to bring up a new issue, not like intentionally being like I'm going to try to throw him off the trail, just
Yeah.
being
Right.
like this feels relevant to this, but actually it's an entirely different issue.
Yes. Instead of staying with his issue and trying to address that specifically, you're saying like, well, you always do this to me and you're always, you know, nitpicking me or not being kind to me or being
I feel like
aggressive in
I've
this way.
done this a billion times.
Sure. I mean, I
And had this done to me
have.
a billion times also in arguments.
Yes,
In
I-
relationships.
I absolutely feel like I have as well.
well, I think what's interesting about it is that, like, unlike when I was asking before, is it like changing the subject? Like, kind of, but it's that the two people are both talking about a different thing back and forth to each other. So it's
Exactly.
not like,
And, like,
someone
nothing
brings
ever
up
gets
something
resolved.
else and now we're talking about that.
No.
It's like we're just, like you said, talking past each other.
Yes. So like one person stays on one track the entire argument, and the other person stays on the other track, and never the two shall meet.
Right.
see.
And
That's
so
the
both
issue.
feel like the other's just not admitting or like not really like being there and having the conversation.
Yeah.
Because in the other person's mind, we're talking about something different.
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like
So-
I've definitely seen this a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, neither person is willing to give way or really even address the fact that, like, hey, we're talking about two different things here. And honestly, they may not even see that in the moment. And something that the podcast talked about is the idea of, like, hierarchy in a situation such as, like, a boss and a subordinate relationship. So the thing is, like, a person who's the boss can talk about, like, you're doing this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and then the subordinate, even though they're sitting there being silent, they can be switch tracking in their mind and saying, like, well, you the boss, like, everybody actually hates you and you're a micromanager and blah blah blah. And so they may not even be hearing the criticism that the boss is giving them, and instead just like switching to another thing altogether in their mind.
Like,
and
like you're criticizing the source in your head rather than
Sure.
listening to the content of
feedback.
what's being
Correct,
said.
exactly. And we could even do that, you know, in our own relationships. Say
for
we're
sure.
sitting
Yeah.
there
Yeah,
and being
yeah,
silent,
definitely.
but in our head we're being like, you're being ridiculous.
be
You're
like,
one to
This
talk.
is
You're
stupid.
Either
totally.
you want to talk or why is he bringing this up now?
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, like what's the motive behind this?
Right,
Yeah.
what's the motive? What is he
Yeah.
really trying to say? Or
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah. Totally.
And something that they also talked about is that it's often way easier to hear a criticism or to even hear like a suggestion from somebody who's not actually, you know, really involved with you, like someone who's not even your best friend, just some stranger, or especially someone who's not like a loved one. They gave an example that some stranger told a man at his work, like, hey, you need to be, maybe you should think about doing this. And he came home and told his wife, and his wife was like, I've been telling you to do that thing for 10 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the thing is, like, a highly insightful comment might be threatening to someone who we're in love with. So like if Dedeker, you were even to say something to me, like I may feel threatened by that just because I care about you and because I really care about your opinion. But some stranger, I might be like, oh my God, they're the second coming. Like they know what they know what I
coming.
need. Yes.
Well, I think about that I think that for me, there's some things that I've uncovered in therapy that like partners have said to me, or maybe a parent has said to me, or a friend has said to me, but it's not until I'm in therapy that
Yeah.
the therapist says it,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like I do totally do that all the time.
Yeah,
and
that's super
no,
objective
because
viewpoint.
of the fact that, yeah, depending on who the source is, that you're more likely to be, I guess, doing that switch tracking in your mind that
Yeah.
gets you kind of out of the mode of actually being able to hear that feedback or that thought or that opinion.
Totally. And I guess, I mean, this is something that they said, and I'm not entirely certain if I agree with it, but they said the people who love us the most are also the ones who want to change us the most. And I'd like to think that that's not necessarily the case. But if we are in these situations like this where we have a habit that happens over and over again, and then our partner is the one who's saying, hey, I don't want you to do that anymore, that is a behavior that they are in essence trying to change. So
Well, I think, yeah, depending on the context.
Yeah.
If you just say, like, they're the ones who want to change us the most, it sounds bad. But if you did think about it, like, you know, Emily, I keep seeing you do this thing that makes you unhappy. And I want you to change more than a stranger does because I care, because I'm
Sure.
invested. So
Yeah.
it's not like I want you to change who you are as a person, but more like I want you to change for the best for yourself.
no, I
you know?
agree. And
So
that's not
I can
necessarily
see
a
it
bad
in that
thing.
context, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something to be aware of within the connotation and the context
I
of
think
the
it makes sense
questions we
that,
have. Yeah.
like when you're in a relationship, when you're with someone that you love, that's the person you're going to be most likely asking to change something, even if it's not changing who you are. But if it's like, this behavior that you do really upsets me, or this way that you communicate like really doesn't work for me, and so can you change that? Can you try this? Can you do this differently?
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
when we get into like feedback, maybe critical feedback, and that's when we get into like the switch tracking loop, I suppose.
Totally.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there any way to avoid this? Because I'm trying to think about it and I just like can't even.
Yeah, well, there's a couple. They talked about mindfulness. When I looked this up, Psychology Today had a great article. There's a man named John Kabat-Zinn, who is the creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he operationally defines mindfulness as the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, which is really difficult to do in real life, but it's something to be aware of and to try to do.
It's not impossible, though.
No.
I feel like we talk about mindfulness techniques a lot on this show. It's definitely not impossible to do.
And again, it's something like through meditation, you can just practice and become much better at, obviously. But in addition, it doesn't like avoid emotions, but it just like holds them in attentiveness. So you can recognize your own emotion, but then not necessarily need to act upon it at all times. It also talked about bias recognition, and because we have talked about cognitive biases on this show,
Right.
and just to be aware of them within this, and to also know that like your partner may have a cognitive bias as well, and that might be affecting the things that they're saying to you, and that might also be affecting the things that you're receiving or what you're saying to them.
It feels like this could be one of those things that even just knowing that this thing exists, mixed with a little bit of mindfulness and awareness, might be enough to, when you're in that conversation and you're frustrated with like, why are they like not acknowledging what I'm saying to them?
Yes.
Especially if you've been able to talk to them, talk about this with them before, I could see being like, hey, I think we're doing that switch tracking thing. Let's talk about both. What's the thing you want to talk about? Cool, let's write that down and we'll get to that, but can we first talk about this other thing, or vice versa, right?
Yeah, if you can kind of compartmentalize each different thing that you're speaking about and talk about it in a logical manner, then I think that would be best.
Well, one time, Jase and I, we did like kind of a mini emergency radar around like one particularly very emotionally charged issue.
Right, yeah.
That ended up being a number of smaller issues that I think we found that we had to be like, okay, let's actually have like a mini radar. Let's make a little mini agenda of like all the different pieces of this and then just kind of tackle them one by one.
That's great.
And then do the normal steps of like, action points and then appreciation at the end and things like that.
Yeah. And I also think what we've done with radar in, again, like compartmentalizing like sex, health, just anything like family, all of those things, that kind of also makes, obviously there can be like mini arguments within each of them, but I think that leaves space for those specific things to talk about them in kind of a safe environment.
Right, so that it's not like, well, I feel frustrated that you keep turning me down for sex. Well, like, you never do the dishes.
Yeah, it's like, okay, is this really about this? Yeah.
But I think I see that a lot, and I've definitely personally experienced this a lot when you have arguments where, like, the past keeps coming into play as well. That feels like a huge example of switch tracking where...
Right.
everything's attached to everything else in the past, and so that's why it can come up, you know, and be really hard to stay focused on like what the actual issue is in the present moment.
Yeah, totally. Just the last thing I was going to say is to try to focus on the positive motives of your partner. Like it come into every situation, and even if somebody feels like they're talking past you, with the idea that they are putting a positive spin on it, that they want the best for you and that they want the best for that situation, and just to hold space and make, your disagreements come to a place where you both can agree on something. So even if in the moment it seems like they're talking past you or getting defensive, like maybe take a second and look at that and then put your own arguments aside and then be like, okay, fine, we'll talk about this for a moment.
Of course, easier said than done.
Yes.
But with practice, definitely possible. And I think also, especially if you can get your partner or partners looped into this concept, again, it's an awareness thing, that it's something that you can in the middle be like, you know what, I think we're switch tracking right now. Can we reset or like kind of sit down and like make a list of what are the things we need to hit here? You know, to be able to have that kind of stop button in the middle of an argument when things are starting to get heated or cyclical or things like that.
Yeah, and that comes with mindfulness as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
but I think just to acknowledge, like, hey, the fact that you brought up something different than what I was trying to talk about means that's probably worth talking about too. That
Yes.
it's not just like, hey,
Right,
stop
yeah,
that.
not just stop
Yeah,
that and
we're
focus
not
on
allowed
my
to talk
issue.
about
Yeah,
that right
exactly.
now.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
cool though. I think that's definitely a useful one.
Yeah,
I'm going to be
definitely
on the
something to think
lookout
about.
for this one.
I know,
with
right?
you
Cross hatching.
guys.
I mean, switch
Yeah,
track.
cross hatching.
I mean, train spotting.
What did I call it? Like switchbacking?
Yeah,
or
and I'm
something?
like Nickelbacking?
It's none of a, yes,
Nickelbacking?
and then
Yeah.
we said Nickelback, and then we talked about Christian magazines.
CCM, Christian magazines.
It was a long
That was
tangent.
a wild ride.
All right, so I'm next.
Yeah,
Yay.
what you got for us?
I'm going to talk to you about bids.
Like bidding
$1,
on cattle?
$2, $3, $4.
There you go, yes.
No, not on cattle.
You'd make a great
Oh.
auctioneer.
They're auctioning them off to farm sanctuaries.
Yay.
Good, yes.
Thank you.
Right. So bids, and what I mean by that is a bid is any attempt from one partner to another for attention, affirmation, affection, or any other positive connection. And this is something that was discovered and sort of codified by the Gottman Institute. And we've talked about the Gottman Institute before. They're
Yeah,
the
quite
ones
a
who
few
came up
times.
with like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of a relationship. They're also the stuff we talked about in our episode on the science of happy relationships. A lot of that was from the Gottman Institute. They've done some really interesting things. It's very
They're relatively heteronormative.
heteronormative and mononormative. So these just study specifically marriages with the assumption that the only good outcome is staying together and the bad outcome is not being together anymore. But given that, there's still a lot of really cool research that's come out of this. So this particular one came out of a study where they interviewed couples like right around the time they had just gotten married, and then 6 years later they followed up with these couples, and what they found is that the couples who stayed married after those 6 years, or were still married after 6 years, they reacted positively to each other's bids around 86% of the time.
Oh.
And that couples that had divorced averaged only 33% of the time. So pretty huge difference in terms of how often, and the term they use is turn toward each other rather than turn away. So if someone comes in for some sort of affirmation, affection, or attention, do you acknowledge that? Do you engage with that? Or do you turn away from that?
So, okay, but my question is, so they codify bids as these like particular interactions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you have a question? Okay. Well, so this can look a number of different ways. The sort of basic example that they start with are, verbal things. They're actually things you say. And there's also nonverbal ones. So we'll talk about the verbal ones first. So
Okay.
basically, the way they break it down is there's things that you can say to your partner, but then there's like actually another meaning behind it. So the first example that they give is, how do I look? The actual subtext is, can I have your attention? It's not that I want an answer to a question, but I want you to pay attention to me for a moment to get
Not
your
like-
opinion
It's
on
just like,
something.
look at me.
Not like tell me I look great. Just like
Right.
love
I mean,
me.
that would probably be good too.
Yeah.
But it's right. The subtext there is, I want your attention. Or let's put the kids to bed. The subtext there is like, help me put the kids to bed. Right. It's like, I want your help with something. This one's a little interesting, is starting off with something like, I talked to my sister today, or I talked to my mom today. The subtext there is, I want to have a conversation with you about that.
Like,
Yeah.
will you talk to me?
Right. Like, will you chat with me about this?
it, yeah.
Because otherwise it's just like, cool. Right. And that's the difference, right?
And it was
Between
great.
between the like not turning toward your partner, not accepting the bid, is to be like, cool, honey. Right?
Right.
And I feel like we've all done that in some extent at some time, where you're just kind of like in your own zone and you're not
Yeah.
acknowledging
Well,
that.
I feel it can get very subtle, because it could be something like, oh, I really want to show you this YouTube video I saw today. Or,
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
or oh, there's a show on Netflix I've been really wanting to check out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is actually like, it could be multiple. It could be like, can I have some of your time? Can we cuddle on the couch together? Can
Right.
we laugh at this show together?
Yeah. But it's the sort of time and attention and affection and all those things that are part of it that are the important part of this transaction. Maybe it's bad to call it that, but the important part of this bid.
Communication is transactional.
Yeah.
It is
Sure.
a back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a more subtle version of this would be something like, I had a really terrible meeting with my boss today, and the subtext there is like, I want to process this with you.
Yeah, I want to decompress.
Right.
I want
And
some kind of triforce around this.
exactly. I was
Yeah.
going to say,
Ooh, yeah.
in their example here, they say the subtext is, will you help me de-stress? And I'm like, well, knowing the Triforce a little better, yes, maybe, but let's be clearer about how
Totally.
they want you to help them do
Right,
that.
right.
But in either case, it's acknowledging that and going for that. And I think something that we were talking about too is like, how can you do this in a way, even if you can't say yes to that bid right then? Right? So say you're right in the middle of something and it's like, oh my gosh, have I shown you this YouTube video, or did you see this meme? It's sort of that question of like, whenever possible, can you say yes to that? Can you be like, okay, sure, like I'll take a moment to look at that? Or if you can't, at least do what you can to sort of turn toward that bid and acknowledge it and be like, oh, that sounds amazing. Can I watch it in 20 minutes once I'm done with this? Right?
Yeah.
The difference between that and like, honey, stop bugging me, I'm busy. Right?
Right.
That's
very big.
pretty huge.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then,
I
yeah,
have
sorry,
to say,
yeah.
like, as soon as I learned about this whole bids thing, it really changed the way that I looked at these kind of interactions with my partners. I saw them as much more significant than I ever did before.
Yeah.
And realizing, like, when I say to someone, like, no, I'm not interested in that, or like, no, that's not my type of show, I'm never going to watch that, or whatever, like, actually realizing the impact of that. Of
Yeah,
that
because
being,
it's not necessarily about the thing.
Right,
It's
exactly. Of it not being about the thing, of it being about.
care about me in this
Yeah,
moment.
about turning toward my partner instead of away.
Yeah.
And so again, it doesn't mean that like I have to watch every single Netflix show that my partner recommends. But
Yes, you do.
It is about finding a way that's not just a shutdown.
Well, and with bigger things too, like sex, for instance.
Right.
I mean, that can kind of be like a cumulative effect if you constantly say no, 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 no.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
potentially.
so that's the other thing I wanted to get to.
Sure.
Is here's the other side of it, is being a better bid giver, bid offerer.
Sure. How to bid better.
Just a better bidder.
Right, because like with things like sex or any of these examples, something that seems very small and simple, like, how do I look? I just want your attention. I want you to acknowledge me for a moment. Seems pretty reasonable that you could take a moment to say yes to that and give that. However, with something like sex or doing a specific chore at a certain time, or going out to do something, that can be a little harder because maybe you don't have time, maybe you just really don't want to.
Yeah.
That it can become a little bit trickier. And so what I think they don't address as much in this, but I think is incredibly important, and this is something that we've all talked about a little bit earlier, is this idea of these couples where they see them accepting each other's bids much more often. I think that part of that is because they're better at knowing when to make the bids.
When to make the bid also.
That's a
Interesting.
really good point.
So
Yeah.
I think sex is a good example of that, where it's getting out of your own head of just like, I want this thing right now, I'm in the mood for this thing right now, to like combining that with what am I seeing, how my partner's feeling, how do I know from interacting with them before when they're more or less likely to be interested in this? Have they even told me specifically, like, I don't like doing that in the morning or something? Like, what can you take a little step? It goes back to the mindfulness thing.
Yeah.
But can you take a little step outside of just your own thoughts and your own desires to go, is this something that I think they'd be receptive to right now?
Yeah.
And then approaching it then, or being like, okay, I'll wait and maybe talk about that more later. And obviously this is something like with sex, hopefully you're having those conversations in your relationship radars and, can get better with that.
Right.
But I think that's a good example.
But we had a big discussion about this before this episode about like, how do you say no to a bid still in a way that's turning toward your partner?
Right.
And I think for me, when it comes to something like sex, like if a partner, if I have a partner who like pitches sex or like we don't know what it is. Is it offering a bid? Is it giving a bid? Makes
No, right? We should
places
have
a bid.
figured out the terminology.
Place a bid. Yeah, I like
places a bid on sex.
I'll wager $5.
And
Exactly.
like, if I don't want to have sex at that moment, of finding out what's the way to make sure that the message is still, I think you're sexy. I do enjoy having sex with you.
Yeah.
Just not right now.
Well, there's a big difference between just outright saying like no and or
Right.
saying I am interested in something with you, maybe not necessarily that, but let's perhaps have an intimate moment, whether that just be being affectionate to one another, like words of affirmation, or laying in bed naked together and
Right.
being kissy.
Right. So it's kind of like, because I know I've definitely, as far as the sex one goes, I've definitely been really bad at rejecting the bit of like being really rude or being really impatient or
Sure.
just like even like pushing their hands off my body and just being like, ugh, you know, like definitely like more destructive rejecting of bids versus being able to be like, oh, I do really like when you touch me that way, but like, can we do something different?
Yeah.
Or I'm not feeling great. Could we do this at such and such time instead? Or things like
Yeah,
that.
no, I think that example you gave is really interesting because I've definitely had times where I'm like working on something and a partner would, come up behind me and, put their hands on my shoulder or maybe like kiss my ear or something. And when I'm really focused on something, to me, that's like ugh, God, like get off of me. Stop touching me because it's like distracting.
Because you're in the zone.
Yeah, because I'm in the zone. And I did have a realization with that one a few years ago where I noticed that I was doing that and being like, why am I reacting this way to something that normally I would like?
Totally.
And getting to that place of being able to combine, like taking myself out of where I'm focused for a moment, just long enough to kind of appreciate that and be like, hey, and give a little bit of that affection back and be like, I'm really focused on this though right now. So like, please let me stick to this. And, we're going to have dinner in like an hour. Let's talk then and like see how we feel afterward, rather than being like, well, okay, do you want to make out for a little bit insteed right now? Like that just doesn't seem reasonable to me
Because
as
it
an
depends
alternative.
on the context.
Yeah.
Right, but that's the example
Yeah.
that comes up that I know has happened in my life.
I see.
And so your example of like just like pushing them away versus like, oh, that's really sweet, I like that, but I'm working on
Yeah.
something else right now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hugely different.
Yeah, and again, having mindfulness over the situation on both ends, I think is really important.
I will say it's definitely made me a lot more likely to watch people's YouTube videos. well, I think once I realized, I was
Fine,
like,
I'll watch
this isn't about the video. This is about like having this like minuscule moment of connection, and that's like
That's
whatever.
why
Even
you
if I'm
guys
not
watch all the YouTube videos I send you,
like
all
even
the
if-
figure skating videos.
Exactly. Even if I'm like not interested in the subject, or maybe this isn't my favorite thing to watch, or whatever, like it's more valuable to be like, okay, I chose to connect with you for this 2 minutes of this video, rather than like I'm really not that busy of a person that I can't take 2 minutes just to like have this micro moment of connection with you.
That's interesting though, because I was trying to come up with an example of a different sort of situation that's not sex, that involves turning down a bid and how you can do that while still, giving that interaction and making it a positive one. And I think that YouTube one is a good one because Emily sends us a lot of figure skating YouTube videos. And
They are
other
great.
things. Sometimes they're also
They are wonderful.
cute animals. Both of you guys send a lot of cute animal
Yes.
videos to our group thread. And a lot of times when I'm at work, I'm like, no, I really can't take 2 minutes to do this.
Yeah.
Or I don't feel like that would be appropriate right now for me at work. But with this idea of bids, I have tried to at least acknowledge the fact that you posted it rather
Sure.
than just let it sit there in silence.
I
And be like,
appreciate that.
oh, wow, that looks really cute. I'm excited to check that out later.
Oh,
Right? Is like,
I like that.
I feel like you guys have probably seen me respond
Yeah,
with
definitely.
something along those lines.
Yeah.
Right, but that's kind of that meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
So the other example I came up with here was person number one says, do you want to go?
Wait, you didn't write a script for
I
us,
didn't.
did you?
I mean, it's right here if you want to.
Wait, where?
No, I didn't write a script for you. I'm just
okay,
going
fine,
to do
just
it.
go ahead.
Okay, just do it.
So
just do it.
person number one says, do you want to go clothes shopping with me today? Now you are person number two, and you really don't want to do that. You have other stuff you want to do today. Maybe it's not even that you can't, you just really don't want to. You could either just be like, ugh, I really don't want to do that, or like, I'm busy. but that's not only is that saying no, but it's also not engaging with the person with like the subtext of what they're trying to say. So an alternative would be to say, oh, that's cool. Did you have something fun that you want to get? Have a little bit of conversation, where you can say, I can't go today, or like, I really don't feel like going, but that's really cool that you want to get something. I'm excited to see what you get. Like giving them at least.
So it's still kind of like, I'm giving you my attention. I'm still seeing you. I'm still engaged.
Right. Even if I'm not able to do the thing that you want, that I'm at least not just being like, no, like stop bugging me about going clothes shopping. Right. Instead, seeing they want me to go clothes shopping because they want to connect with me. They want to talk about these things with me. So trying to find a way to give some of that.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Now I'm never going to send you all YouTube videos again.
No, I love them.
should.
I do
No,
watch
they're
them
great.
later. I do
They're
watch
great.
them later.
Yeah, I do watch them later too. Often, actually, I usually watch them in the moment.
Yeah,
but
you do.
Sometimes
You're
I come
better
back to them
about that.
later.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a cute animal video.
Yeah.
See, I'm more likely to watch the figure skating ones than the cute animals,
interesting.
actually.
Interesting. I'm surprised.
Getting
Maybe I
some
should just
interesting
send them
data
to your private threads. All right. It's
Okay,
Dedeker's
so
turn.
now it's
Yeah.
my turn. So this is something that I came up with a name for it. I don't know if there's an official name.
No,
We
no.
came up-
Collectively
we
came up
Collaboratively
with
came
Okay.
up with a name for it.
It's okay. Dedeker's the alpha.
Oh my god. The recurring in-joke of Multiamory.
Yes.
We collaboratively came up with a name for this. I don't know if there's a set name for this phenomenon or not. If you, the listener, have heard of something like this, please send us an email and let us know. But we decided to call this microscripts. And so this kind of goes in line with some of the other communication hacks that we've come up with previously, like radar, like the Triforce of communication, like movies, which, by the way, if you haven't listened to those episodes, go back and listen to them so you can understand all of our references that we make, and it'll change your life, I promise.
Yeah.
So I definitely have a huge thing about ritual, and I don't mean like pagan rituals, though those are fine, but like I have a thing about incorporating ritual into communication, which is kind of like the hacks or like the tools that we develop, which is kind of finding a codified way to communicate that can transcend your absurd emotions, essentially. I mean, that's why we came up with radar and with the Triforce and all these things is the idea that we know that communication can get messy. When emotions get involved, it can get even messier. And so figuring out a formula, something that you and your partner can follow together to find
To
a
make
way
you a Vulcan.
to make you a Vulcan, which is always my ultimate goal for everyone on this
Oh my
planet.
God, stop. No, but seriously though, it's like something to lean on when things get difficult.
Something to lean on when things are starting to get heated or difficult or things like that.
Right.
So this microscript thing, and I think the Triforce kind of counts as this as well, is that it's kind of like this,
okay.
almost
Yeah,
like a code phrase.
1, 2, 3.
Exactly. It's a code phrase, essentially, that sums up a lot of meaning in a very short phrase. So I think microscripts are very helpful if you are finding that you and your partner get into a lot of like repetitive communication breakdowns, kind of like the switch tracking thing, or repetitive argument, or a repetitive script in general. Of like a particular argument always plays out the same way, that you bring up this and then your partner brings up this and then inevitably you bring up this and then it goes to this point, and like you can you're starting to have the same argument over and over, or the same like little fights crop up about the same things over and over. So it does take some self-awareness to recognize your patterns, to be able to sit down with your partner and be able to recognize like, oh, I notice that we keep arguing about chores, for instance, or we keep arguing about like who's going to make dinner or whatever. Those are relatively small things. And it does take the willingness to actually sit down and figure those things out. A radar or some kind of regularly established check-in is great for this, of being able to sit down and actually take inventory of like, these are the things that we fought about in the past month, or this is something that keeps coming up in our conversations, and how can we resolve this? And I think the most important part, and we did talk about this in our conflict crash course episode, is that it requires kind of changing the mentality around particular points of conflict so that it's an us versus the problem dynamic versus, as opposed to you versus me. Does that make sense to all y'all?
It does, but I feel like I'm going to be the audience member right now
Okay.
who's going, cool, all this stuff sounds great, but what the fuck are microscripts?
Okay, well-
Please tell me what this actually is.
Okay, so I think that it's easier to explain with examples.
Alrighty.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'm going to use an example of my sister in her marriage. So, my sister and her husband have been together for like 200 years, it feels like.
They have some
and
chillins.
I have to
Yeah.
say, they actually are honestly one of the few examples in my personal life of people who've been married for a long time that I actually really admire.
Oh, lovely.
And I mean, I've seen them through thick and thin, through arguments and times when things feel good, and I actually really admire them. So what she shared with me is they were finding that they kept getting into a lot of like fights about nothing just because they were like crabbing at each other.
Okay.
An example would be like, maybe she'd be like, hey, can you go outside and bring the trash cans back in? And he would get it from the couch and be like, ugh, like, fine, and then she would see his negative reaction and be like, well, why are you all cranky? And then he'd be like, well, I'm not cranky, I just don't want to do this. And, and then it gets into like this back and forth of them just like crabbing at each other because they're both like tired and cranky, and like it turns into a fight about nothing, like totally not a necessary fight, not a fight that's having productive communication, just them crabbing at each other.
Yeah.
And I've definitely experienced that many times in my relationship also. And so they sat down, they realized this was a problem. They realized it was a pattern. And they decided like, okay, we got to figure out a way to have a different script essentially for this fight or this argument. And
Right.
so what they do now is they kind of decided if one of them asks the other for a favor, which is a bid to a certain extent,
yeah.
one of them
There's a
bids asking
similarity.
for help, then the other person, even if they're like in the middle of something or even if they're annoyed, even if they don't want to go out and get the trash cans, like instead of it being this like, ugh, okay, fine, that the other one just says, ready, and then goes and does the thing, So the way this looks in their house is that my sister will be like, oh, hey, can you help me with something really quick? And he'll just be like, ready, and that's it. And then she'll be like, oh, well, you go do this thing. And I'll be like, okay.
That's
And
great.
that's it. And then
Yeah.
for some reason in their household, their children are in Spanish immersion school, so it got changed to saying listo instead.
So now it's listo.
So now it's just listo. And I know Jason and I have tried to incorporate this a little bit, but it's the kind of thing where it's like you showing up with like your sighing and like your crappy energy just really doesn't help. And so
Yeah.
it just gives you a script to follow.
And it's an interesting one too, because I could see the criticism being like, well, come on, like how fake can you be? And it's like, well, yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
But you both acknowledge that it's fake. And I think
Right.
that's the thing. It's not like some script where you're trying to fool the other person that you are excited to
Exactly.
take
Yeah,
the
you're
trash
not
in.
trying to like put on an Oscar-winning performance that you are super excited to do this task.
But by doing the microscript, you're acknowledging like, yes, I'm ready to help you. Like we both know I probably don't want to do this thing,
but I'm going to, God damn it.
But I'm going to, and I know it's not your fault that we have to take the trash in.
Exactly. It's not
Or
your fault that we have to adult.
vacuum or whatever, right?
Totally. So what's another one?
Yeah, so one that Jase came up with, this is like a little bit different, and I think this came up actually in our radar was when we came up with this solution with this particular microscript, is that we found like one of us would compliment the other. So like maybe I'd say to Jase like, oh, like, you... now I can't think of a compliment.
God damn it.
I'll be
You
like,
have very nice
your hair,
teeth.
like the haircut you got looks really good. Like you look really handsome today. And Jase's response would be like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not handsome. Or honestly, I was guilty of the same thing where like Jase would be like, oh, like you look really nice today, and be like, oh, like I don't feel nice. Oh, I don't feel sexy. Oh, I don't feel attractive. Like, and then sometimes
that
it
makes
would
the
end
other person be like, okay.
Right, yeah, sometimes it would end there. Sometimes it would end in this back and forth of like one person being like, oh, no, I'm not attracted. And the other person like, no, you are. And the other person be like, no, I'm not. And then like that's just like not a fun conversation to be in, really.
Right.
And so we made up a microscript to follow of like, if one of us gives a compliment and the other person's not feeling it, not feeling like they can take the compliment, instead of being like, no, I'm not, they just say, why, thank you.
That's good.
And that's it.
And sometimes it's like, no, I mean, why, thank you.
Yeah.
But at least, right, it's like we said, it's not like you're trying to fool anyone, but you're
Yeah.
acknowledging, right, I should accept this compliment
Yeah.
rather than just try to tell you why you're wrong.
Right,
Totally.
Right. you can kind of think of these also as like code words. I really love encouraging my clients to like come up with some kind of ritual and attach it to a code word, which is very much like the Triforce, where it's like Triforce number 2. Oh, okay, I know what that code word means. I know it means that you need like a hug and support and encouragement and things like that. Jase,
I was just
this one?
Oh no! Well, I was just gonna say that even something like switchbacking,
Switch tracking,
switch tracking,
day to day,
switch tracking. Even something like that, like having a label for a thing, is a kind of another example of a code word.
Yeah,
definitely. It's not quite a microscript like we're talking about, but it is a code word to be like, because you and I have already talked about what this phenomenon is.
Yeah,
we can
say
just
like we're nickelbacking right now.
totally gonna use that. Holy shit.
Well,
hey, if that helps you, if saying nickelbacking helps you to like laugh a little bit in an argument, use it.
Totally.
Like use it to help break that tension and get y'all out of it.
Yeah.
Damn it. I really, really badly wanted to make a joke by like singing a Nickelback song, and I realized I don't know any Nickelback songs.
No,
I probably
Thank
do.
goodness.
I probably do, but I don't realize.
We don't need to explore that
just
right
don't.
now.
I probably do, but I don't realize what they are.
We don't need to explore that right now. Can I go to my last two examples of manuscripts? Another one that we came up with was there'd be times, and again, this was another thing that came up in a radar when we were willing to sit down and kind of examine our communication patterns. When I found that Jase would have like some new idea for like something to do with multiamory or something to do at work, and he would start processing it out loud because he's also a spewer, and we'd be like, oh gosh, but I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm really not sure how I'm going to do this. I mean, maybe I could do it this way, but then I'm not entirely sure. Like, maybe I could do this.
Emily's like, yeah, I know this.
I'm like, well, I do this too. Not exactly like you do.
We have different styles of spewing.
Em does it too.
Yeah.
I do, but I do it about like, this is going on in my life right now, and I gotta talk about it.
I gotta do this, and then exactly. And anyway, so
and you get all the blowback from both of us. Sorry.
So the chewer, the internal processor, sees that, and I would start getting immediately stressed out of like, oh gosh, he's really stressed out. He's freaking out. I need to help him somehow. What do I need to do? Oh my God. And I would go into total panic. Like, what do I need to do to help you? Like, do I need to answer all these? Do I need to give you all this advice? Like, I don't know what to do.
But then when we talked about it, what I explained was from my point of view, that's not me freaking out and being like overwhelmed by all these problems. It's more just like I'm excited about something, so I'm thinking about it a lot. And for me, it's like a fun excitement and not a like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. Whereas to her, it seemed like I was in, oh my God, I'm so stressed mode. Right? So that was the sort of recurring pattern. And so what we came up with is the way I explained it to her. I was like, no, I'm just excited like a puppy dog gets really excited about something, and it kind of like works itself up over this thing that it's very excited about. And that's not because the dog is stressed out. It's because it's excited about something.
Yeah.
And so our code word for that was, if she's like, are you stressed about this or whatever, or are you just excited? I can just be like, woof, woof.
Yeah.
Like you're a puppy.
Woof, woof.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it comes up in conversation where it's like you're talking about something, and if I'm starting to be like, well, I don't know what you're going to do, like, yada, 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 that you'll be like, no, baby, woof, 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 woof. And then I'm like, okay, you're just a puppy. It's okay.
Right.
This last one, this comes from a blog post that was posted a little while ago in the Multiamory patron-only group. That was called The Honesty Exchange, and it was specifically a kind of, I think, aimed at people who are polyamorous, trying to figure out communication, trying to figure out honest disclosure. It was about ways to graciously give honesty to your partner and also ways to graciously receive honesty from your partner so that it's just easier and safer to be honest in the relationship in general.
Yeah.
Because that's like such a major problem with communication that I think we all struggle with to a certain extent, of like wanting to be honest but also fearing hurting someone or fearing somebody's reaction. And so that makes it really hard, and at best it just means that it's an uncomfortable conversation, and at worst it means that we're hiding things or not being honest because we're afraid of a reaction.
I mean, it's similar to the bid thing, right?
Yeah,
if you
definitely.
set up an expectation that your bids all get turned down, or that you're always having to turn down bids because their timing's bad at asking them, that's going to negatively impact your relationship. And the same thing, if like any time I make myself vulnerable to be honest with you, I get a bad reaction, that's going to make me less inclined to be honest with you, or it's just going to be harder to do.
Right. So in this blog post, the Honesty Exchange, they came up with a microscript. I mean, they didn't call it that, but it
because
is what
that's
it
ours.
is.
Trademark.
But that is what it is. And it was basically like, if your partner tells you something, like maybe they come home from a date and they reveal like, yeah, we went to this restaurant and then afterwards we went back to their place and we had sex for the first time. And maybe like that's totally within the bounds of your relationship, but maybe it's still uncomfortable to hear. Like we've all been there. That instead of that being the moment where you have your big reaction or where you process it right then, all the things that are coming up, the script that you follow is just, thank you for your honesty. Like start there. And maybe it's thank you for your honesty. Like let's sit down and just cuddle and watch Netflix and then it's fine. Or maybe it's thank you for your honesty. I'm going to go take a walk around the block and then come back and then maybe we can talk about the way I'm feeling. Or thank you for your honesty. I'm going to go take a shower and be in the bathroom by myself for half an hour and then you'll see me after that. But the idea of like starting from that point, just that like little script of thank you for your honesty so that your first reaction to honesty isn't like a punishment on your partner. Even if you don't intend it for it to be a punishment on your partner, it can still be received that way. Exactly.
Yeah. And I like that because it's not like completely stepping away from the situation right then either. It's giving some sort of feedback and then perhaps taking a moment for yourself.
Yeah. And that's something that I think that script can either be, maybe that's just something you decide for yourself that you're going to use of like when you're feeling something, but you don't want to like dump all over your partner right in that moment. Or it's something that you and your partner can talk about so that your partner knows, like when you say, thank you for your honesty, your partner knows like, okay, I know you need a little time to go and process, but I know that things are okay, but that you just need a little time for emotions to settle. You know, that's another way that it can be used as well.
Totally.
I feel like another example of something very similar to that I found myself starting to do that has been really helpful is in times when I'm receiving criticism. Whether it's from one of the two of you, like all the time.
Oh, jeez.
Whoops.
No, or even if it's at work in a professional context, of depending on how I'm feeling at that moment, how my self-esteem is at that moment, how I feel about the thing that you're saying, my reaction could be like, oh, that's a great point, or like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's fine. Like, who are you to tell me this? Like, why would you tell me this right now? All those sorts of things like we talked about before. Is doing a similar thing of kind of having a microscript for myself of like, thank you for letting me know, or like, thank you for telling me that. Sometimes, often followed up with like, I need to think about that for a little while. So that it kind of, to me, gives me this sort of, I'm acknowledging and I'm appreciating the fact that you were honest with me. So it's kind of similar where it's like, that might not have been easy for you to say. I'm acknowledging that. But by saying I need some time to think about that, or I'll think about that, it's saying I acknowledge it, I'm taking it seriously. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm saying you're right or you're wrong, but just I'm going to think about it. I will take it seriously. But it also carries with it the like, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Or maybe I need a moment before we do.
I mean, you're all theater kids. Do you know TTMFN?
Talk to you later for now.
Talk to you later for now.
Oh, I always heard it as TTFN.
Oh, well, we always do TTMFN, which is take the motherfucking note.
I heard it's just take the fucking note.
I don't know if this is necessarily a good example that applies to like romantic relationships, but it's a good example of a microscript. And so the idea was that you do rehearsal, and then after you do rehearsal, like you get notes on your scene or your performance or whatever, where the director is like, and it can be anything of like, I don't think that like you're projecting enough in this scene, or it can be like you messed up the blocking in this scene, or it could be like we need to try a different emotional angle in the scene, any number of things. Right. And the idea is that like when you get notes, you write it down and you just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't sit there and you argue it. You don't sit there and defend yourself. If you really feel like a note is in the wrong, like you go to the director privately afterwards instead of like wasting everybody's time and talking about it. And I think actually,
but in the moment, just take it.
That applies to, I think, Jase, what you're talking about with the work situation, with getting feedback. That you can still just be like, thank you, and then like have some time to think about it. And if you really feel like the feedback is not warranted or there's nothing you can get from it, then you can bring it up later or, have that conversation in a different space.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, instead of getting like defensive in that moment.
Yeah.
Well, this was
right.
fun, guys.
Yeah.
This is great. I wish I could keep going. I love stuff like this.
I know,
Yeah.
we learned something different from each of us, and hopefully you all out there learned something too.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came to our live shows.
Oh, man.
All over the country. We still have our LA show coming up on
May
May
9th.
9th.
Yeah.
So we hope to see you there. That's going to be a really exciting show too. So
Yeah, and a
get
really
your
cool
tickets
venue.
now if you haven't already. Nice big venue downtown LA at a brewery.
Woo!
Super excited about it.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be freaking awesome. And if you'd like to have your question or comment played on the show, you can call 678-MULTI-05. Just had a voice lesson today, so...
So you're all warmed up and ready to go.
Exactly. And leave us a voicemail, or you can send us an audio message at the Multiamory Facebook page. You can also email us at info@multiamory.com or send us a message on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. To support our show and join our private Facebook community, go to patreon.com/multiamory. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase Lindgren, Dedeker Winston, and me, Emily Matlack. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.